Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yang berhormat Dato Indera Mohd Shahar bin Abdullah, Deputy Minister of Finance 1, yang berbahagia Tan Sri Michael Yeo, President KSI Strategic Institute for Asia Pacific, yang berbahagia Dato Sri Muhammad Iqbal Rotha, Chairman of the Economic Club Kuala Lumpur, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning. Welcome to the Malaysian Economic Summit 2022. We are especially grateful to our Deputy Minister of Finance 1, Yang Berhormat Dato Indera Mohd Shahar bin Abdullah, for gracing our event this morning and to deliver the keynote address, Accelerating Structural Transformation to Drive Economic Growth, the case for Malaysia. Thank you, Yang Berhormat Dato Indera. I'm sorry for not being able to be there in person due to my current commitment at the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies. But I look forward to following the exciting proceedings, albeit virtually. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me in my welcome address to share some thoughts on the state of the Malaysian economy in terms of opportunities and challenges. It was not too long ago that the world economy was engulfed by the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020, the global economy contracted by 3.1%. It then recovered last year with a healthy 6.1% in terms of real GDP growth. Malaysia, like most countries, had to contain the pandemic through lockdowns, and as a result, the economy contracted by 5.6% in 2020 before growing 3.1% last year. For this year, 2022, Bank Negara Malaysia forecasts economic growth to be between 5.3% and 6.3%, whilst the World Bank projects the economy to grow by 5.5% this year. It is important to note that these forecasts have been downgraded, underscoring the uncertainties within and beyond the country. The good news is that Malaysia's economy seems to be on the path of recovery, corresponding with the reopening of the economy. The economy exceeded expectations as recorded a 5% GDP growth rate in the first quarter of this year, and that has encouraged some Malaysian houses to forecast a growth of about 6% for 2022. From a sectoral perspective of the economy, the services sector, which contributes some 57% to our GDP, only recovered in the second half of 2021, recording 1.9% growth last year. Even before the pandemic, this sector began plateauing in 2019, and its future trajectory is uncertain. Nonetheless, other sectors, particularly manufacturing, have rebounded strongly with 9.5% growth last year. I believe there are a number of factors to be optimistic of Malaysia's growth outlook. Firstly, and most importantly, Malaysia has entered the endemic phase with the relaxation of pandemic control measures and reopening of our international borders. This will likely give a boost to the economy with high mobility for economic activities. Evidently, the traffic congestion has also become worse than before the pandemic. The endemic phase is likely to contribute to the revival of Malaysia's tourism industry. According to the Department of Statistics Malaysia, the tourism industry supports some 3.5 million jobs. During the border closures following the pandemic, tourist arrivals and tourism receipts plunged by more than 80% in 2020. The reopening of international borders, especially with Singapore and other ASEAN countries, bodes well for the industry. The high vaccination rate, with close to 80% of the population being vaccinated with 2 doses, is another important factor, and this compares favorably against ASEAN's rate of 60%. Even as the number of daily COVID-19 cases increased following the recent festivities and holidays, the number of COVID-19 deaths remained low. Our healthcare system is not under tremendous pressure as it was in the past 2 years. In addition, sound government policy has provided economic relief and support for the people and businesses. These measures include employment incentives, cash transfers and subsidies through the various measures and packages totaling some 530 billion implemented by the government. As a result, the unemployment rate has significantly declined from the peak of 5.3% back in May 2020 to 4.1% last month in May 2022. With more jobs, there will be more spending that will drive private consumption. Business confidence indicator published by the Department of Statistics Malaysia in February 2022 showed that economic activities are expected to increase. It bodes well for our economic revival. It is also worth mentioning that Malaysia remains an attractive destination for foreign investors. Our foreign direct investment doubled to 24.7 billion ringgit in the fourth quarter of 2021 from the fourth quarter of 2020. The total approved investments in 2021 amounted to some 306.5 billion ringgit, accounting for 68.1%. Speaking of policy, the Ministry of Finance's recent release of their second pre-budget statement in preparation for the 2023 budget is a very much welcome step. It outlines key priorities, including reinforcing the post-COVID recovery, strengthening economic and fiscal resilience, and driving more inclusive and sustainable development. I believe Yang Berhormat Dato Indera Mohd Shahar will be shedding more light on this. The figures that I mentioned mean that there's much to be optimistic of our economic future. Our economic fundamentals are sound, we have turned the corner against the pandemic, and we are well on our way to recovery. However, we must be clear about the challenges on the horizon. And that brings me to the second part on the domestic and global challenges on the horizon. As they say, if there is an upside, there will be downside. We must consider domestic and global challenges that will affect our Malaysian economy. Geopolitical risks threaten our recovery. The conflict in Ukraine and the economic sanctions on Russia have created uncertainties. It has exacerbated the supply shocks in commodities such as crude oil, natural gas, wheat, and sunflower oil. Ukraine and Russia are major exporters of some of these commodities, and as a result, the supply shocks have driven up the prices of food commodities. Malaysia has had to contend with these inflationary pressures. Our annual CPI went from minus 1.2% in 2020 to 2.5% in 2021. And the inflation rate will continue to rise this year. Inflation has been driven by significant increases in transportation and food costs. Food prices have increased between 3.6% and 4% in the first quarter of this year. Fortunately, the government's fuel subsidy has kept the lead on further increases on fuel costs. The gap between subsidized and non-subsidized fuel products is staggering. To give an idea, in the first week of June, the price of RON 95 is 2 ringgit and 5 cents per litre, whereas that of RON 97 is 4 ringgit 70 cents per litre. The fuel subsidy is a double-edged sword because while it keeps inflation down, the government's fiscal space will be shrinking. The Minister of Finance recently mentioned that the government's annual subsidy may double to 71 billion ringgit this year. According to MYF, the government's debt to GDP ratio that stood at 63.3% in June 2021 against the 65% threshold set by the Parliament. And unless the limit is raised, fiscal resources from additional borrowings could be limited. Another major domestic issue is the political uncertainties that have afflicted the country since the last general election. The one question on the minds of many people is when will the next general election will be held? Well, thus far, there are no indications. And obviously, political uncertainties weigh heavily on market sentiments. The economic boost from the endemic phase may be neutralized by the adverse global developments, such as the conflict in Ukraine, China's COVID-19 lockdown, and inflationary pressures. The short-term goal of economic stabilization should focus on supporting domestic demand and addressing the impact of imported inflation from weaker exchange rates and higher fuel prices. Bank Negara Malaysia has recently raised the overnight policy rate to 2% last month, and obviously there's room to address the creeping inflation. Ladies and gentlemen, I've laid out the opportunities and challenges. I'm excited to hear from the 4 panels, including the heavyweight economists that we have today, on the various economic challenges from structural issues to economic outlook. As always, I am cautiously optimistic that Malaysia will be able to overcome these challenges if we Malaysians were to come together, be constructive, and do what we can in our respective roles. Malaysia has weathered similar crises in the past, including the Asian financial crisis, global financial crisis, and the 2015 stock market turbulence. That doesn't mean that it's the same. Obviously, what we are going through today is very different and will require different solutions, I would say. And therefore, we must never rest on our laurels. We must be persistent and focused. Ladies and gentlemen, before I end, I would like to once again thank Yang Berhormat Dato Indera Mohd Shahar Abdullah for gracing our event this morning. And also thank you to the organizers, KSI and the Economic Club of Kuala Lumpur, who have been instrumental in making sure the hard questions will be discussed during this event. Thank you to all our distinguished panelists and speakers, and thank you to all of you for joining us, and I wish you a productive session ahead. With that, sekian, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri, for your welcome remarks and giving us a comprehensive overview of the Malaysian economic situation and your advice on how Malaysia should chart its way forward amidst developments locally and abroad. I would also like to thank Tan Sri Wahid for joining us from Oxford. He's actually based there at the moment for some engagements. And thank you so much, Tan Sri, for joining us. It's only 2:43 a.m. in the morning, so I hope you're not doing too badly over there. Well, thank you, Tan Sri. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now it is with great honor that I invite Yang Berhormat Dato Indera Mohd Shahar bin Abdullah, Deputy Minister Finance 1 Malaysia, to deliver the opening keynote address.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, salam keluarga Malaysia, makmur sejahtera. Apa khabar semua? How are you? Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Abdul Wahid Omar, Chairman ECKL Advisory Council and also Chairman Bursa Malaysia. Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Michael Yeoh, President KSI Strategy Institute for Asia Pacific. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to deliver a keynote speech theme, Accelerating Structural Transformation to Drive Economic Growth, the case for Malaysia, that is hosted by KSI and ECKL. This keynote speech is timely as Malaysia is gearing up to deliver her commitments for the 2030 Global Agenda on Sustainable Development, which is to leave no one behind, and the Malaysia Shared Prosperity Vision 2030, which pursue to make Malaysia a nation that achieves sustainable growth with fair and equitable distribution across income groups, ethnicity, regions, and supply chains. These commitments, ladies and gentlemen, are aimed at strengthening political stability, enhancing the nation's prosperity, and ensuring that the nation is united in embracing ethnic and cultural diversity. These commitments to seek to eradicate poverty and hunger, fight inequality and discrimination, tackle climate change, promote harmonious and inclusive society in achieving sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, These commitments cannot be achieved without a strong devotion to structural economic transformation. Structural reforms are needed to improve the living standards, particularly through the creation of high-quality and high-paying jobs for Malaysians. What is equally important is that the growth must be inclusive, especially among youth and vulnerable groups that includes low-income households, disabled persons, and communities in remote areas. Malaysia, being a diversified nation and economy that has strong trade integration with the global economy and has a robust domestic growth, stand at 31st largest economy in the world. Prior to the COVID-19, which hit the country in about 2.5 years ago, Malaysia had experienced a sustained growth at an average of 5% annually. It is great to learn that our economy has doubled since the year 2000, with 581 billion ringgit Malaysia to 1.4 trillion ringgit Malaysia in 2021. Unfortunately, with the strike of COVID-19 in the first half of the year 2020, many countries had to impose lockdown measures, which impacted the economic growth and resulted in another global recession, which has been as severe as the Great Depression in 1930s. Malaysians is not spared from this, ladies and gentlemen. The movement control order that was imposed has taken a toll on our nation economy activities. Eventually, due to this, Malaysia recorded a 5.5% contraction in 2020, compared then in the year 1998. During the ASEAN financial crisis, the contraction is about 7.4%. The COVID-19 has affected all walks of life and their livelihoods. Reacting to the effects of this pandemic onto the nation, Malaysia has adopted comprehensive and complementary policy responses through a series of stimulus and aid packages worth 530 billion ringgit Malaysia, approximately 34% of Malaysian GDP, including sizable fiscal support like cash transfers, tax incentive, and wage subsidies. This measure will be complemented by the reduction in the OPR, overnight policy rate, by a cumulative 125 basis points to a historical low of 1.75%, as well as a TD sum of financial measures, including loan moratorium for household and SMEs, and various financing facilities for SMEs. As a result, these measures have saved 2.7 million jobs and have benefited more than 20 million people and 2.4 million businesses. These positive impacts also measures has also been translated into a more encouraging labour market conditions. The unemployment rate has decreased significantly from the peak of 5.3% recorded in May 2020 to 4.1% in March 2022, and further decreased to record a full employment level at 3.9% in April 2022. In year 2021, Malaysia growth rebounded at 3.1% to amid realization of containment measures and robust external demand across manufactured goods and commodities. In the verge of managing the effects of COVID-19, which is now declared as an endemic, the Malaysian economy is expected to improve further this year, with a growth rate of between 5.3% and 6.3%. This is driven by increased domestic demands and continuous export growth without movement restriction order, reopen of international borders, and improved labour market condition. However, ladies and gentlemen, the outlook will continue to be mainly affected by external risks that include a weaker than expected global growth, further escalations of geopolitical conflicts worsen supply chain disruptions, and adverse developments. There are also other risks to growth that could arise from better than expected employment and income conditions, and faster than expected improvement in tourism-related sector with the opening of the international borders. Even though our country's economy is recovering, we are need to accelerate the structural transformation that includes human capital development through the strategic initiative identified in 12th Malaysia Plan and the Malaysian Digital Economic Blueprint. The pandemic has provided us with opportunity to develop safer, better, greener, and more sustainable measures. These measures are crucial for our country to meet the net zero greenhouse gas GHG emissions target as early as the year 2050. Ladies and gentlemen, despite numerous challenges, our country can cope with these challenges well. There are several reasons for this. First, our economy rests on the strong fundamental. We have a diversified economic structure and a sound financial system. Second, we too have an effective public healthcare system and proactive macroeconomic policies that have assisted our country in meeting the challenges. With the reason being mentioned, and since we have embarked on the endemic stage of COVID-19, the government should be more prepared in terms of mechanism to plan, implement, manage, and monitor all plans, developments, and policy in the getting ready for the future. First, the government is aware that structural reforms are needed in addressing the issues of income and costs among households in meeting future shocks like COVID-19. Due to COVID-19, households in Malaysia are met with vulnerable financial position. Some have lost their job, some have no income at all, some have doubled their expenses on education as young children and adults must learn virtually. The government is aware that the country needs to have a reform by having a stronger social protection system that is more cost-effective and less fragmented to improve the well-being of Malaysians during the endemic phase in the future. Second, the government is also aware that the country needs to have a system of policies and programs that are aimed to guarantee the protection of the needy. The system should be agile to dynamic circumstances and should be fiscally sustainable. Such government policies and programs will ensure that the needy will be supported and protected. Third, the government is aware that we need to boost our productivity growth. We have done relatively well compared to our neighboring countries, but in terms of productivity rate, we are behind. Besides, there are also significant differences in productivity levels among firms in Malaysia. A pre-pandemic estimation from the World Bank has suggested that smaller firms generally fall significantly behind their larger counterpart. In addition, firms in the top 25% of the productivity distribution are nearly 12 times more productive than those in the bottom 25%. Fourth, is rather sad to know that amount spent research and development R&D activities in Malaysia has decreased after experiencing steady increase until the year 2016. Gross public expenditure on R&D has dropped from 1.4% of GDP in 2016 to 1% of GDP in 2018. We realize that this did not meet our expected goal of 2% of GDP and average of 2.6% of OECD. We also acknowledge that Malaysian firms are also less likely to spend on R&D compared to their regional peers. Ladies and gentlemen, no one is an island. The governments need the support from all the quarters in implementing the plans and programs. enhancing the nation's productivity, we have a dream to be a nation that is innovative, creative, resilient, and progressive in meeting the challenges that come from within and outside the country. I believe that strategic action are needed, accelerate the needed structural transformation, and ensure the progress and well-being of people sustainably. Ladies and gentlemen, there are several actions that we can take to accelerate the structural transformation. First, we must promote sectors that have comparative advantages and nurture key sectors like agriculture, in which majority of the population is engaged in. Higher agricultural productivity would deliver triple dividends, which are sustained food security, more productive human resource, and more efficient use of land and water. Agricultural transformations remains a catalytic driver of economic diversification, industrialization, and human through its impact on household incomes, employment, and well-being of the communities. Second, we must implement integrated strategies and broad partnership to strengthen institutions, address regulatory barriers, and ensure adequate protection for investors and workers. This will reduce macroeconomic and political stability, promote a competitive environment for local industries, increase domestic and external investment, and establish access to long-term financing. Third, priorities must be given to social and economic infrastructure that includes social security in developing a more inclusive and sustainable future. The cash assistance and the fuel subsidies programs will be enhanced through more effective distribution mechanism, moving away from blanket subsidies to more focused subsidies. This will ensure that the targeted groups of the needy will not be deprived of their rights. By doing this, the government can provide the optimum social security for vulnerable groups. When the needs of this group are fulfilled by the government, then resilient to economy, social, politics, and environment challenges will be strengthened among them. Fourth, we must continue to equip our workforce, particularly the younger generations, with appropriate and up-to-date skill and knowledge through quality TVET, entrepreneurial development, and upskilling education programs. The rural youth and young talents who are out of school will be supported with integrated business incubations and innovation entrepreneur programs. This is to ensure that no one is left behind in optimizing their economic potential and reaping benefits from the economic growth. The delivery system of education and training will also be reviewed and improved regularly in line with the current digitalizations and the fourth industrial revolution 4IR to produce future-ready talents who are agile, multi-skilled, and competitive to meet the changing landscape of the employment world. To fill the labor supply-demand gap in the market, strategies to expedite automation and high value added in the production activities must be reinforced in supporting the creation of more high-paying jobs. The hiring of migrant workers, particularly the low skills, must be based on the actual needs of economic sectors. This is reduce the country reliance on the foreign workers. Hence, industries are encouraged to exercise patriotism in employment, in which priority and opportunity must be given to our local talents to fill up the job vacancies. Employers are also urged to offer decent wages to workers to attract more local talents in taking up the less popular jobs, or better known as 3D jobs. Finally, we must increase inclusivity by including and empowering the most vulnerable, like people with different abilities, and young rural and ghetto communities. The hiring of vulnerable groups and certain gender is relatively low in some jobs. Hence, we are losing in the term of productivity because of the absence of these people in the workforce. The government then should further reinforce policy to reduce the economic and social gap within the nation, accelerate equality and enrich women empowerment through investing in women enterprises and engaging the public and private sector in breaking the glass ceiling. In ensuring a more balanced regional development, the government will continue to attract high-quality investment in all economic corridors. Rural areas will develop as a growth catalyst. Therefore, emphasis will be given to improve the business ecosystem and upgrade infrastructure in the less developed region and states. Ladies and gentlemen, focusing on the recovery agenda, the government will continue to strengthen and implement fiscal reforms to achieve fiscal sustainability through several tax measures. In the last budget, the tax reform initiatives that were proposed focus on base broadening measures like review on broad-based initiative relief and deductions. Among the tax revenue strategies to increase fiscal space include initiative on green tax, digital economy, subsidy rationalizations, and review on sustainable consumption tax. In addition, Malaysia is actively participating in various international tax collaboration platforms to ensure our tax system respond well to the international practices while considering the needs of the country. Looking ahead, ladies and gentlemen, now is the time to have structural reform to drive Malaysia to the next level of her development journey. We must take any risk as an opportunity to narrow the gaps in the policy frameworks that are holding the country back from achieving her full potential. Furthermore, these gaps are most costly during a crisis while we move towards to reach a high income status in the coming years. We need to cautiously design and implement policies that boost the female labor participations, improve the quality of human capital, enhance competitiveness among workforce, create quality jobs, and modernize institutions. With financial inclusion being explicitly recognized in 8 out of 70 Sustainable Development Goals SDG, the advance of financial inclusion is important to promote more inclusive economic growth and ensure the well-being of Malaysians. This will entail catalyzing digital financial services to meet the needs of underserved, adopting and sustaining the growth of e-payment in enriching the delivery of government services to the public and facilitating a stronger social protection framework that fits our country's aspiration to be a high-income nation. Ladies and gentlemen, during the preparation and finalizations of Budget 2023, the Ministry of Finance is committed to take on extensive public and stakeholder engagement to obtain input and suggestions. The public and stakeholders assist the Ministry to formulate appropriate policies for betterment of the people and the country. As the saying goes, together we stand, divided we fall. I truly believe that working closely and supporting one another will make our country strong and prosperous for all. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for lending me your ears. And to the participants of this summit, have a productive summit and I wish you success. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih.